We're standing in front of the entrance of Oakwood Cemetery at the end of East Avenue, approximately a mile from Main Street in downtown Red Wing. The cemetery is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and the location at the top of the hill overlooking the city has been used by the early settlers beginning in the earliest days in the 1850s. The first days of the non-native settlement. Beginning in 1854, formal efforts began to locate and procure land for a cemetery, resulting in the purchase of the initial 35 acres at the top of the hill. The first deed was recorded in 1857, but it wasn't until 1864 that the grounds were platted, and the following year when the name Oakwood Cemetery was formally adopted. 15 years after the first burials. The Blodgett Memorial Arch was gifted to the city of Red Wing by Elijah J. Blodgett in memory of his wife Sarah. Born in Vermont in 1832, Blodgett came to Red Wing to enter the grain business with T.B. Sheldon and served as alderman and mayor in city government, and at the time of his death was director of the LaGrange Mills, the Red Wing Union Stonework Company, and the Red Wing Sewer Pipe Company. The Betcher Memorial Chapel was a gift of Margaret Betcher in memory of her late husband, Charles Betcher, a prominent local burnt merchant and industrialist, best known as the owner of the Betcher Sawmill and Lumberyards. Both the arch and the chapel were constructed in 1907 from Red Wing limestone building stone. Behind them, a roadway leads to the cemetery itself at the top of the hill. Additional information can be found at the City of Red Wing's official website, www.redwing.org, or by searching for Oakwood Cemetery. There's also a list on the RWCS members website, www.redwingcollectors.org, under resources, Red Wing Pottery Gravestones pamphlet. And this is what you'll find there, and it has a map that is annotated with all the locations of the pottery markers that we're going to be looking at. As we come up the hill from the entrance, at the top of the hill at Summit Avenue, we take an immediate left and a second immediate left onto Wilson Avenue. And the first monument is the Louisa Morley Monument, which is on the right-hand side of Wilson Avenue between Summit Avenue and Ames Avenue. Louisa M. Morley's marker in white glazed stoneware with highlights in blue and black is found by taking the first left turns at the top of the entry road. Like many of the markers, it has suffered damage from the effects of weather and vandalism. It originally included a crucifix with a bust of Christ wearing a crown of thorns. Louisa was born in Missouri to William and Mary Morley and died at the age of 5 from an internal infection. William was a laborer at the sewer pipe factory, but the marker was obviously made at the stoneware factories. Her marker stands in the family plot alongside the memorial, or the monument, for her paternal grandparents, Martha and Charles A. Morley. Charles was an English potter born in the Pottery Center of Staffordshire, who migrated to Ohio, where he worked in the pottery industry, before coming to Red Wing in 1870 to work at William Filio's Terracotta Works, the first pot shop organized in Red Wing. Louisa's father, William, was a brother of Frank A. Morley, who worked at Red Wing Stonework Company beginning at age 15 and operated a saloon and cigar store at 1503 West Main Street, the present location of the Red Wing Brewing Company pub, not in the original building. Frank commissioned the large decorated advertising jug on display at the Pottery Museum. Frank died in the Philippines while serving as lieutenant in Company G of the 13th Minnesota Regiment during the Spanish-American War. He's also buried here in Oakwood. Another of William's brothers, Samuel L. Morley, was a grocer whose store at 1529 Old West Main Street, on the corner across from Kelly's Tap House, was shown in an old photograph with the Morley jug displayed in the window. Within sight of the Morley marker is a planter and headstone for Annie W. Peterson, who was born on 31st of October 1887 and died 27th of June 1899 at 11 years of age. Her mother and father are both buried here as well. Her mother was Blenda Peterson, and her father was Charles John Peterson, who was a laborer at the sewer pipe factory. And obviously from the glaze and the color of the clay, that piece was made in the sewer pipe factory rather than the stoneware factory. The clay is red clay rather than tan, and the glaze is salt glaze on that iron-rich red clay, which makes it give it a dark brown appearance, like a piece of sewer pipe. Knowing how 18th, 19th century labor was treated, I'm sure that it was done after hours, perhaps at home even, and then brought in. In a case like this, I think even the most hard-hearted managers would allow it be done, but otherwise it was, not frowned upon. You, first of all, you weren't working 8 hours a day, you were working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, for maybe $1 a day, and well, the average annual wage in the United States was like $600 a year at, around that time. So nobody got rich in the pottery industry. The managers and stockholders did all right, but the laborers, it was definitely a blue-collar occupation. The kiln setters and turners earned more, but there were, it still wasn't something that anybody got wealthy off of. But just the plain laborers, and about everybody at the sewer pipe factory would be a laborer. The whole concept of lunch hour pieces is, it looms large in legend, but the only, don't have a whole lot of first-hand testimony about how it was all done. An aunt of mine worked spraying glazes around 1940 for a couple of years. And she said, well, the old timers, they had all these old molds, the little shoes and bulldogs and different things like that. She said, oh yeah, they'd always be coming and asking if I would spray glaze on this for them. And if you want one, I'll make another one for you. And she always turned them down. But she always would hide them under her bench until lunch hour, so that just to avoid any questions or getting in trouble or anything else. My dad was a Cub Scout, Boy Scout leader, troop leader, assistant troop leader, and he had gone to the pottery one time to just get a coffee can full of clay that can have the boys do some work with, and they wanted to charge him for the clay. So they were pretty tight with their pennies, and some of the reputations that the robber barons, these weren't robber barons, and they were the ones that did get rich. They were generous, as the Betcher and Blodgett families were. and the Sheldon family. a lot of generosity. Yeah, and you can see this is her father, Charles J. Peterson, and her mother, Blenda Peterson, and a couple of sisters. Well, now that's interesting. On the planter, her name is very plainly Annie W. Peterson, but on this marker it's Annie B. Peterson. But the dates all match up. It's definitely the regular gravestone for her. But one or the other got the middle initial wrong. This flower urn here, cemetery urn, was a production piece, a regular production piece by the stoneware factories. This one by the Glaze would date probably to the 1930s.
This marker is for Mrs. C.M. Nelson, Clara Amanda Nelson. She was born in Sweden in 1858 and immigrated to the United States in 1869. And in 1879 married her husband, John Nelson. They had a son, according to the early census, but I believe that son was either adopted or the product of an earlier marriage of John, because she was only 13 at the time that Frank Nelson was born. The 1895 Minnesota census lists his name as Frank E., and he was a laborer at the sewer pipe factory. The 1910 federal census lists a Frank A. Nelson, living on his own by that time, who is then a kill sitter at the stoneware factory. So we believe, of course, this marker was made at the sewer pipe factory, which we can tell by the color and style and everything else. So this was apparently made by her son or adopted son, her son, Frank Nelson. And it's one of the more lovely of the markers. It has the grape vines and grape bunches on it, which particularly the grape bunches are in symbolic of the blood of Christ.
Our next item is a handmade tree stump. It's near the grave of Sadie Olson, and we speculate that it was made for her to adorn her grave. She was born in 1869 and died in 1949. She was married to August Olson, and according to the 1930 census, their son Leonard was a laborer at the sewer pipe company. So on that basis, we attribute it to her family. He was he was a member of the board of Redwig Stoneware Company and the second president of North Star. Well, it's sewer pipe like the other one, so it would have been a traditional way of glazing utilitarian stoneware was you would shovel rock salt into the kiln, and the rock salt would vaporize in the heat and make a chemical reaction where the sodium in the salt, or from the salt, would chemically react with the silica in the clay to form a sodium silicate glass on the surface. And in the cases where you're using iron-rich clay, the lower quality of clay that wouldn't be suitable for utilitarian stoneware, then the glaze becomes very dark brown, and that's how you can identify it as having been fired in a sewer pipe factory, made in a sewer pipe factory. And you can see from the shape, you have Y's and W's and different things like that are standard products of a sewer pipe factory, and by scratching on the surface to make it look like bark or like a tree stump, you can make a nice marker flower planter. Andrew Meacham, A.J. Meacham, was he was a director of the Red Wing Stoneware Company, and after the North Star Stoneware Company was founded, the original president, F.W. Foyt, passed away suddenly, and Andy Meacham became the second president of the North Star Stoneware Company, and he's buried there under a granite marker or granite monument and a granite headstone, very plain headstone, not handmade at all. We're standing near the grave of William Filio, who was the proprietor of the Filio Terracotta Company, which was the first organized pot shop in Red Wing. The headstone is commemorating his Civil War service, where he was a lieutenant in Company G of the 7th Minnesota Infantry. Next to him is the gravestone of his wife, Lucy Filio. They were both from prominent families. William Filio's family was a pioneer family in Red Wing. His father, Francis Fayette Filio, was mayor of Red Wing, and it was in his shop downtown that the first display of Filio pottery was made in, I think, around 1868, something like that. The other thing that's interesting about this is right here in the ground is a boundary marker that was a commercial product made by the stoneware factories as a boundary marker for cemetery lots. And there are a number of them in the cemetery here. It's a boundary marker. The surveyor would have put that in to show where the limits of the plot were. Next we have another sewer pipe planter and marker. This one was made for Francis Merritt Olson, who was born in May 17th, 1899, and died just 23 days later. On one side it says Baby Olson. She was the daughter of Christian and Edith Olson. Christian was a laborer at the sewer pipe company for many years, all the way from 1900 to the 1940 census. He's recorded as an employee. One other note is near that site is a regular headstone for an old friend of ours, Orville Olson, who was maybe another son. Orville, who passed away maybe 20 years ago, was the curator of the Goodhue County Historical Society Museum, and we became good friends. These are unique. These, most, even the potters, I mean, they didn't have a affection for pottery any more than a carpenter has affection for wood, or a blacksmith for iron, but particularly for children and wives. They would make a flower planter for their wife, or if their wife died early, they would make a flower planter for their or a marker for their wife, or a flower planter while she was still alive. Infant mortality was very high in those days, and as you can gather, some of these infants that are memorialized only lived for a few months, some of them for 5 or 11 years. And the cemetery actually has a section specifically designated to babies, infants who died in childbirth. Most of them aren't handmade, but that's a very touching section of the cemetery. The ones that were made in the sewer pipe factory a lot of times started out as a standard piece, a Y or a W, but then had scratches in them to make them look like bark, and in some cases had plaques, grape leaves, other grapes themselves. There's one over here that has an anchor, which was in symbology that goes with grave markers and so forth, has to do with Christianity and faith and love and different things like that. So all of those traditions were found in these handmade grave markers and flower planters. There really aren't any two that are absolutely alike. Unlike, you look at the plain rectangular granite markers, they're astonishingly similar to one another, even made at different periods of time. But those, like the fancier monuments, you could have those were all custom made by a monument company. There you could be as extravagant as you could afford. Well, that's one of the hallmarks, distinguishing features of pottery, is that you can mold it as plastic. You can mold it into any shape, and it'll hold that shape. So any detail that you put in, literally if you put a thumbprint into it, it'll remain there in the fired piece of pottery. You can't do that with granite. You could do it with marble, but as you can see with the Filio headstone, after 120 years, marble is pretty porous and starts to erode away. Granite is much more durable. If you fill them with soil and the soil is wet and it freezes, it'll burst the walls, and that's happened with many of them. Sadly, I think the first time that I was born in Red Wing, so we used to come up here on a whim, when we were kids. First time I came up here specifically to look at headstones was, I believe, 1979, and at that time many of the markers that we'll be looking at that are horribly damaged today were in much finer condition then. It's kind of sad, but ashes to ashes. Number 6 on our list is a tree stump. This one is unknown as to the maker or to whom it was dedicated, because it's not near enough to any other legible headstones to determine a link. Number 7 is for Carl Lindbergh, who was born in 1898 and died in 1899, so another infant. We believe he to be the son of Felix and Anna Lindbergh. There were many Carl Lindberghs who were born in Red Wing between the 1870s and 1900s, so it's possibly that a relative worked at one of the stoneware companies. Mrs. Samuel Hanner is number 8, and this grave marker with an anchor below, anchor being a symbol. I'm not sure if it's uniquely in Christianity or it's in tradition anyway, for grave markers, for love or faith. And this marker belongs to Mrs. Samuel Hanner, who was born in 1855 and died in 1897. We believe her first name was Addie. Samuel and Addie had a son named Fred who worked at the sewer pipe company for many years. So it is a sewer pipe marker, so that's why we attribute it to her. Number 4 on our list is a marker for Clara Genevieve Larson. Clara was born on January 15th, 1900, and died on March 18th, 1912. She was the adopted daughter of Jacob and Theresa Larson. In the 1900 census, Jacob was listed as a laborer at the sewer pipe company. Clara's marker is one of the more beautiful and well executed, I believe, of the sewer pipe markers. Here's a planter marker for Carl Oscar Sjogren. Carl was the son of William and Hannah Sjogren. He was born January 5th, 1897, and died May 31st, 1897. In the 1910 census, his father was listed as a laborer at the sewer pipe company, and so from that information and from the appearance of the marker itself, we can conclude that it was made at the sewer pipe company. Okay, here we have another planter made at the sewer pipe factory. This is near the grave sites of Anna and Olaf Sundberg. There was another son who is not buried in this vicinity, but in the 1900 census, his name was Frank Sundberg. In the 1900 census, Frank was listed as a jollyman at the stoneware company. This is obviously sewer pipe, so just how it came to be, what its history was, whether Frank had it made or had a friend make it for him, a friend that worked at the sewer pipe company. Number 10 on our list is a tree stump marker that has the prominent initials JCP on the side, and it's near the marker for Lewis Jackson Phillips. So we've drawn the conclusion that it must have been a Phillips, but can't determine exactly who. In the 1900 census, Lewis was listed as a glazer at the stoneware office, but again, obviously this was made in the sewer pipe factory. Lewis J. Phillips worked for Minnesota Stoneware Company for most of his 24 years in Red Wing, and he had a son, Charles O. Phillips, who was a naturalist, born in Red Wing, and in 1890. He died, this is a bit of trivia, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but he died at the Old Faithful station in Yellowstone Park. He had picked what he thought was watercress, but it turned out to be water hemlock, and he died in the Old Faithful station. It was noted that Lewis, his father, lived in Red Wing for 24 years, and most of the time employed by the Minnesota Stoneware Company. And he's remembered as being the man who stopped a frightful runaway of a 4-horse team at the 4th of July parade here in Red Wing in 1891. There were some stoneware ones that were regular production products that showed up in the 1894 catalogs. So they were making cemetery urns and large monuments, very much like the base of the Louisa Morley marker, except they would have an urn on top rather than a crucifix. There used to be a fair number of them still up here, but time has taken their toll, and even 40 years ago, a lot of them were cracked or damaged or eroded, and the only ones that I've seen recently had big holes in them, cracks. The cemetery, the entire cemetery, is on the National Register of Historic Sites, or Historic Places. The character, the architecture, the setting, it's, I think uniquely picturesque as cemeteries go, and it's connected very strongly with the history of Red Wing. The first permanent white settler, Joseph Hancock, came as a missionary to the Dakota, the Red Wing tribe, in the 1840s, and his first wife died in 1851, and she was buried near his mission, which was in downtown Red Wing near the Josephson store, near Bush and 3rd Street. There's a historical marker down there. She was initially buried at that site, but her grave remains were moved here to Oakwood later on, as well as Reverend Hancock's other two wives, who both died, preceded him in death, and he is buried here in Oakwood. So I'm not sure of the date that her remains were moved up here, but I'm imagining that it was probably before the cemetery was plotted, because downtown was becoming developed at that time. Get into archaeology or whatever. Most of the hillsides along the bluff or along the river had Indian mounds on the burial mounds. That actually they predated the Dakota actually, but there weren't any recorded for this site. But there was a Dr. Sweeney who came before Minnesota was open for settlement and lived near the river, among the natives and among a neighbor of Reverend Hancock. There was a trading post in town. That was about all of the non-native population. He was, as an avocation, geologist, naturalist, and he had recorded, mapped out where burial mounds were located, and I don't believe that he indicated there were any on this particular hill. That may be wrong, but I don't know.